What if the day your son failed was the day you secretly believed you had failed too, and instead of asking how to fix him, you had to ask how to face yourself? In this slow, real English story from my life in the United States, I share how one exam result shook our family, tested our marriage, challenged our culture, and taught us a powerful lesson about love, support, and never giving up.
The day everything fell. If you have ever stared at a message on your phone and felt your stomach quietly drop to the floor, then you already know the feeling I'm about to describe. It was a normal gray morning in the United States, the kind where the sky looks half asleep and the coffee tastes like it's working overtime. I was standing in my small kitchen, still wearing my old house slippers, when my son walked toward me with eyes that refused to meet mine. He didn't need to say anything. As a parent, you develop this strange superpower. Before the words come out, before the paper appears, before the truth officially arrives, your body already knows. My chest tightened. My brain went silent. And in that quiet second, one uncomfortable thought slipped into my mind like an uninvited guest. Something went wrong. My son finally spoke. Very softly. Dad. I failed. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just 4 simple words that landed heavier than any shout. Now, here is the interesting part, and maybe you will recognize yourself in this moment. When a child fails, many parents immediately think about the child. But that morning, my first reaction was not about him. It was about me. Did I fail too? If you are learning English right now and sometimes feel like giving up, listen carefully. Because the psychology behind this moment is powerful. Researchers in educational psychology have found that parents often tie their identity to their children's performance. In simple English, when kids struggle, parents quietly blame themselves. The brain treats it almost like a personal report card. And standing there in my American kitchen, thousands of miles away from the country where I was born, I felt that research become very real. My son placed the test paper on the table. The red marks were impossible to ignore. You know that color teachers use, not bright red, not dark red, but the exact shade designed to make your confidence disappear. He whispered, "I'm sorry. Let me slow this moment down for you, because this is where many families make the wrong turn." When children apologize for failing, they are usually not just saying sorry for the grade. According to child development studies, what they often mean is, "I'm afraid I disappointed you." The fear of losing parental approval activates the same stress system in the brain as physical danger. Yes, your child's brain can treat disappointment almost like a threat. But in that moment, my tired immigrant brain was not thinking like a scientist. It was thinking like a worried father who had worked too many late shifts and drunk too much cheap coffee. Part of me wanted to lecture him. You know that voice. Every parent has it. The voice that says, "You should have studied more." The voice that believes pressure creates progress. But another part of me, the quieter, wiser part, noticed something important. My son wasn't being lazy. He looked defeated. There is a big difference. If you are using this real English story practice to improve your listening and speaking, pause here and repeat this simple sentence slowly. He looked defeated, not lazy. Good. Feel the rhythm. Slow English works best when the emotions are clear. Back in the kitchen, I pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. The heater hummed softly in the background, "Welcome to winter life in America," and outside, a delivery truck beeped as it reversed. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary morning. But inside our small kitchen, something important was about to happen. You see, many people think failure is the moment everything breaks. But neuroscience tells a different story. Studies show the brain becomes highly plastic, meaning more ready to learn, immediately after mistakes. In simple terms, the moment after failure is actually one of the best times for growth. The problem? Most families panic right at that moment. And I almost did too. I took a slow breath. If you are practicing English with me, breathe with me now. Inhale slowly, and exhale. This is not just for drama. Controlled breathing actually lowers cortisol, the stress hormone that makes clear thinking almost impossible. My son finally looked up at me. His voice was smaller this time. Are you mad? That question, it hits differently when you hear it in real life. Because now the moment was no longer about a test. It was about trust. And maybe you understand this feeling. Maybe you are learning English late at night after work. Maybe you have failed before, an exam, an interview, a goal you didn't reach. Maybe part of you is still quietly asking the world the same question my son asked me that morning. Are you mad at me for trying and not succeeding? I wish I could tell you I answered perfectly right away. I didn't. I'm human. My brain was still wrestling with fear, pride, and that uncomfortable immigrant pressure to make every sacrifice worth it. But something in my son's face stopped me. In the United States, people often talk about growth mindset. You may have heard this phrase in English learning videos. But that morning, it was no longer a theory from a book. It was sitting across from me at the kitchen table, waiting for my response. So instead of raising my voice, I did something that surprised even me. I leaned forward and said slowly, in the calmest English I could manage. We will figure this out. His shoulders moved, just a little, but I saw it. The tension dropped maybe 5%. Not a miracle. Not a movie moment. Just a small human shift. And sometimes, that's exactly where real change begins. Because failure didn't walk into my house that morning to destroy my son. It came to test what kind of father I was becoming. And honestly, the real exam had just started. A father's quiet fear. There is a strange silence that lives inside parents, and you usually don't notice it until something goes wrong. That morning in our small American kitchen, after I told my son, we will figure this out, the room became calm on the outside, but inside my chest, a storm was warming up. If you are practicing English with this story, listen carefully to this sentence and repeat slowly. Calm outside, storm inside. Good. Feel how simple English can still carry deep emotion. My son nodded, but he did not smile. Children are very sensitive emotional detectives. Research from Harvard Center on the Developing Child shows that kids can read parental stress through microexpressions, tiny facial changes adults don't even notice. In plain English, even when you think you're hiding worry, your child often feels it anyway. And mine definitely did. He picked at the corner of the test paper while I sat there pretending to be calm, supportive, and emotionally stable, you know, the full Hollywood parent package. But inside my head, uncomfortable questions were running in circles like they had too much caffeine. Did I push him too hard? Did I not push him enough? Was moving to the United States the right decision for our family? If you've ever moved countries, changed careers, or started learning English later in life, you might recognize this mental spiral. Psychologists call it parental self-attribution bias. Fancy words, simple meaning. When children struggle, parents often overpersonalize the outcome. Basically, your brain turns one bad result into a full documentary about your life mistakes. And my brain was directing the extended version. I stood up and walked to the sink, mostly to give my face something to do. Outside the window, the American neighborhood looked painfully normal. A neighbor walked his golden retriever. Someone started their car. Life, as always, refused to pause for my parenting crisis. Funny how the world does that. Behind me, my son finally spoke again. I studied, but my mind went blank. Now pause here, because this sentence is gold for English learners. Repeat slowly. My mind went blank. Perfect. This is real-life English, simple, emotional, and extremely common in everyday conversation. But more importantly, what he said matched something powerful in cognitive science. Under stress, the brain's working memory, the system that holds information during tests, can temporarily shut down. It's not laziness. It's not lack of intelligence. It's biology wearing uncomfortable shoes. In other words, sometimes the brain freezes before the person does. I turned around and really looked at him this time. Not with my concerned father face. Not with my immigrant who sacrificed everything face. Just looked. His shoulders were slightly curved forward. His fingers were restless. His eyes had that tired, heavy look I had seen before, usually on my own face in the bathroom mirror after long work nights. And that's when the uncomfortable truth tapped me on the shoulder. Maybe my son didn't just inherit my last name. Maybe he inherited my pressure. In the United States, there is a quiet cultural tension many immigrant families understand but rarely talk about. You arrive with hope in one suitcase and fear in the other. You want your children to succeed, but sometimes your love accidentally sounds like expectation wearing formal clothes. Educational researchers have noticed this pattern repeatedly. Children of highly motivated parents often experience higher performance anxiety, even in supportive homes. Not because the parents are cruel, but because the emotional stakes feel heavy. Standing there in that small kitchen, I began to wonder if my good intentions had been carrying too much invisible weight. My son cleared his throat. Dad, do you think I'm not smart? Ah. There it was. The real fear had finally walked into the room. Not the test. Not the grade. Identity. If you are listening closely for English practice, repeat this question slowly. Do you think I'm not smart? Simple words. Deep emotional impact. According to child psychology studies, around ages 10 to 16, children begin forming more permanent beliefs about their intelligence. One harsh reaction from a parent during this window can echo for years. Not always, but often enough to matter. So yes, the next sentence out of my mouth suddenly felt very important. But before I answered him, something unexpected happened inside my own head. Instead of seeing my son as the kid who failed, I suddenly saw a memory, a younger version of myself, sitting in a classroom in a country far away, staring at a test paper that also had too much red ink. Funny how the brain connects dots when your heart slows down enough to notice. Back then, I also thought one bad result meant something permanent about me. Back then, I also wondered if the adults in my life were quietly disappointed. And right there in my American kitchen, across time zones and generations, I realized something uncomfortable but important. This moment was not just about helping my son pass a test. It was about breaking a pattern. Because failure has a sneaky habit. If families don't handle it carefully, it travels silently from parent to child like an emotional heirloom nobody asked for. I walked back to the table and sat down again, this time closer to him. Then I spoke slowly, clearly, the way we practice real, calm English in this channel. No. I think you are learning. His eyebrows moved slightly. Not fully convinced. But listening. And honestly, that small shift in his eyes told me everything. Because sometimes the most important progress doesn't happen on the report card. It happens in the space between one worried question and one careful answer. Our first days in America. Long before that quiet morning in the kitchen, before the failed test, before the worried questions, before my son asked if he was smart, there was another moment that shaped everything. It happened on a cold afternoon when our family first landed in the United States, carrying too many bags and not quite enough confidence. If you are here to practice listening, read this slowly with me. New country. New rules. Same human heart. Good. Let the rhythm settle in your mind. The first thing that hit me in America was not the language. It was the air. It felt different, sharper somehow, especially in winter. Back home, the heat wrapped around you like a heavy blanket. But here, stepping outside in January felt like opening the wrong freezer in someone else's house. My son was younger then. He stepped out of the airport, pulled his jacket tighter, and said in careful English, "It's very cold." I smiled, but inside I was already calculating everything parents secretly calculate when they move countries. New school system. New culture. New expectations. According to migration psychology research, the first year after relocation is one of the highest stress periods for immigrant families. Everything familiar disappears at the same time. Language. Food. Social rules. Even humor. Especially humor. In America, people smile at strangers in the grocery store. The first time it happened to me, I looked behind me to see who they were actually smiling at. True story. Cultural adjustment is not always dramatic, sometimes it's just quietly confusing. For English learners, repeat this simple observation. Everything looked normal, but felt unfamiliar. Perfect. That sentence describes immigrant life better than most textbooks. My son started school 2 weeks after we arrived. If you have ever watched your child walk into a classroom where they don't fully understand the language yet, you know the special kind of helpless parents feel. You stand there smiling, nodding politely, while your internal emotional system is doing push-ups. Research in second language acquisition shows children usually adapt faster than adults linguistically, but emotionally, the transition can still be heavy. Kids may understand words quickly, but understanding social nuance takes longer. And nuance, my friend, is where confidence either grows, or quietly hides. During those early months, my son came home tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical energy. Cognitive scientists call it language fatigue. When the brain processes a non-native language all day, it burns more glucose, yes, actual brain fuel, than when operating in the first language. In simple English, thinking in a second language is expensive for the brain. One evening, not long after school started, he dropped his backpack near the door and sighed. English is hard. Now, if you are practicing with this real English story practice, repeat slowly. English is hard. Short sentence. Universal truth. But here is where many families accidentally create pressure without meaning to. Parents, especially immigrant parents, often respond too quickly with solutions. Study more. Practice more. Try harder. All logical advice. All well-intentioned. But motivation science tells us something subtle. When a learner already feels cognitively overloaded, more pressure can reduce performance instead of improving it. The brain under stress shifts into survival mode, not learning mode. Back then, I didn't fully understand that yet. I simply sat next to him on our small apartment couch, the one we bought secondhand from a family moving to Texas, and asked gently, "What part is hard?" He thought for a moment. "People talk fast." Ah, yes. The classic American speed problem. If you are learning English right now, you probably smiled a little. Because you know exactly what he meant. Native speech often compresses sounds, links words, and drops syllables. To new learners, it can feel like listening to a radio station slightly out of tune. Linguists call this connected speech. Learners usually call it something less polite. So that night, without any grand plan, we started doing something simple that would later become very important in our family. We slowed English down. Instead of forcing speed, we practiced clarity. Short sentences. Clear pronunciation. Real-life phrases. Research from language pedagogy shows that comprehensible input, language that is slightly above the learner's level but still understandable, is one of the most powerful drivers of acquisition. In normal human language, if English feels understandable, the brain stays open. If it feels overwhelming, the brain quietly shuts the door. Night after night, we practiced small conversations at the dinner table. How was school? It was okay. What did you learn? New words. Nothing dramatic. Nothing viral. Just slow, steady communication inside a small immigrant home trying to find its rhythm in America. And here is the part one didn't realize at the time. Those small, patient conversations were not just building his English. They were building his safety. Because when children feel safe while learning, the brain releases dopamine, the motivation chemical, which strengthens memory formation. This is not motivational poster science. This is measurable neurochemistry. Looking back now, sitting in that kitchen years later with the failed test between us, I finally understood something important. My son had not suddenly become bad at learning. He was a sensitive kid navigating a fast, loud system in a country that rewards speed. And maybe, just maybe, the real question was never about his ability. It was about the environment around it. Because sometimes the problem is not that the learner is slow. Sometimes the world is just moving too fast. Love between two worlds. Most people think moving to America tests your English. That's only half the story. What it really tests, quietly, patiently, sometimes painfully, is your relationships. Your marriage. Your patience. Your ability to stay kind when life feels slightly out of rhythm. By the time my son was sitting in that kitchen years later, worried about his failed test, my wife and I had already walked through our own invisible obstacle course. If you are practicing English with me, repeat slowly. New country. Same marriage. New pressure. Good. Let that sink in. When we first arrived in the United States, my wife and I were united by one powerful emotion, survival mode. We were busy with paperwork, jobs, school forms, insurance calls, the glamorous immigrant starter pack. During the first year, many couples actually feel stronger because they are focused on immediate problems. But research in family psychology shows something interesting. Around the second or third year after immigration, stress often shifts from external problems to internal tension inside the family. Once survival becomes routine, emotions finally have space to speak up. And emotions rarely whisper. One evening, about a year after we settled into our small apartment, my wife and I were cleaning the kitchen after dinner. The heater was running too loudly. American heaters have opinions. And my son was in his room doing homework. She spoke first. "I think he feels a lot of pressure." Her voice was calm, but careful. If you've been married long enough, you know that tone. Not accusation. Not complaint. Just observation with emotional weight. I dried my hands slowly and answered in English, the language we had started using more at home to help our son practice. "He needs to be strong." Pause here and repeat for English practice. "He needs to be strong." Simple sentence. Very common parental mindset. But here's where psychology gently taps us on the shoulder. Studies on child resilience show that strength does not grow best under constant pressure. Instead, resilience develops when children experience challenge combined with emotional support. Too much comfort creates fragility. Too much pressure creates anxiety. Balance is the secret recipe. Back in our kitchen, my wife leaned against the counter and gave me the look every husband recognizes internationally. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just deeply unconvinced. "He is strong," she said softly. "But he is also sensitive." Now that word, sensitive, deserves respect. In American culture, people sometimes misunderstand it. They think sensitive means weak. But neuroscience tells a different story. Highly sensitive children often process information more deeply and notice emotional details others miss. In plain English, sensitive kids don't break easier, they just feel more. I didn't respond right away. Part of me still carried the old immigrant instinct: push harder, succeed faster, waste no time. Many of us who move countries carry this quiet urgency inside our bones. We sacrificed comfort to build opportunity. Of course we want our children to run forward, not walk slowly. But marriage has a way of holding up emotional mirrors at inconvenient times. My wife continued, gently but firmly. "When he says English is hard, I don't think he means just the words." That sentence stayed with me longer than I expected. If you are following the English practice, repeat slowly. Not just the words. Because she was right. Language learning is never just about vocabulary. It is about identity, belonging, confidence, and the quiet fear of sounding different in a room full of fast speakers. Linguistic researchers call this language ego. When people use a second language, they often feel more vulnerable because their ability to express personality is temporarily reduced. Imagine having full thoughts but only half the tools to show them. Frustrating, right? That night, my wife and I sat at the small kitchen table long after the dishes were done. Outside, the American neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your thoughts louder. We talked about our son. We talked about school. We talked about the invisible pressure immigrant families sometimes carry without realizing it. And somewhere in that long conversation, something subtle shifted inside me. I began to understand that success in America was not just about pushing forward. It was about pacing wisely. Because here is the uncomfortable truth many parents eventually face. If you push a sensitive child too fast, they don't always run faster. Sometimes, they freeze. Cognitive overload research confirms this pattern. When the brain feels overwhelmed beyond its processing capacity, performance drops even in capable learners. It's not lack of intelligence. It's neurological traffic congestion. Weeks later, long before the failed test morning, I started making small adjustments at home. Nothing dramatic. No big family meeting. Just quieter changes. I slowed my speech when we practiced English. I asked more questions instead of giving quick advice. I watched more carefully when my son looked tired after school. Tiny shifts, but emotionally meaningful ones. And sitting there years later in the kitchen with that red-marked test between us, I suddenly realized something that made my chest tighten in a completely new way. Maybe my son's struggle was not a sudden problem. Maybe it was a signal. Because sometimes children don't collapse out of nowhere. Sometimes they've been carrying weight, very politely, for a long time. When he said, "I'm sorry." There are moments in parenting that look small from the outside but feel enormous on the inside. That morning in our kitchen, the test paper still sitting between us like an uninvited guest, my son finally said the words that quietly break many parents' hearts. "I'm sorry, Dad." If you are practicing English with me, repeat slowly. "I'm sorry, Dad." Simple. Clear. Emotionally heavy. But here is something most people don't realize. According to child psychology research, when kids apologize after academic failure, they are rarely apologizing for the grade itself. More often, they are apologizing for the fear of disappointing someone they love. In plain English, he wasn't sorry for the test. He was afraid of losing my approval. And once that understanding clicked in my brain, the entire moment changed shape. I watched him carefully. His shoulders were slightly raised, a classic stress posture. His eyes kept moving between my face and the table. His fingers tapped lightly, then stopped, then tapped again. Microsignals everywhere. Harvard researchers call this anticipatory stress behavior. The body prepares for negative feedback even before it happens. It's the emotional equivalent of bracing for cold water. If you've ever waited for exam results, a job interview reply, or an important message, your body has probably done the same thing. For English practice, repeat this useful phrase. He was bracing for impact. Good. That's natural, real-life English. Now here is where many well-meaning parents accidentally damage trust without noticing. When a child says, "I'm sorry," the adult brain often jumps immediately to correction mode. Advice mode. Lecture mode. The famous life lesson speech begins warming up in the background. I felt that impulse too. Believe me, it was ready. Years of immigrant pressure, long work hours, and that quiet desire for your child to succeed, they don't disappear overnight. Part of me wanted to say something firm. Something motivational. Something that sounded responsible and parent-like. But something else, something calmer, reminded me of the research I had slowly been learning. Under high stress, the brain's learning centers temporarily reduce activity while the emotional centers become more dominant. Neuroscientists sometimes describe it simply: stressed brains don't absorb lectures very well. In other words, if I started a speech right now, it would probably bounce right off him. So instead, I did something very undramatic. I stayed quiet for a few seconds. If you are following along for listening practice, notice this rhythm. Real conversations are not just words. They are pauses, breathing spaces, emotional timing. Silence, used well, is powerful communication. My son finally looked up, nervous. Are you disappointed? There it was. The real fear had finally spoken clearly. Repeat slowly. Are you disappointed? This is high-frequency emotional English. You will hear it in real life more than in textbooks. And now, standing at the kitchen table in our American home, I understood something with uncomfortable clarity. This moment was bigger than the test. Bigger than the grade. Bigger even than English learning. This was a trust checkpoint. Family therapists often describe these moments as emotional fork-in-the-road situations. One reaction builds long-term safety. The other quietly builds distance. The difference between the two can be just a few carefully chosen words. No pressure, right? I pulled my chair a little closer to him, not dramatically, just enough to reduce the physical space between us. Research in nonverbal communication shows that small proximity changes can significantly affect how safe a conversation feels. Then I spoke slowly, clearly, the way we practice real English here. I'm not disappointed in you. His eyes lifted immediately. Not fully relaxed, but listening very carefully now. So I continued. I'm proud of you for trying. If you are practicing speaking, repeat both sentences together. I'm not disappointed in you. I'm proud of you for trying. Good. Feel how supportive English sounds when it is calm and direct. Now, let's talk science for a second, but in simple human language. Studies on growth mindset, especially the work popularized by Dr. Carol Dweck, show that praising effort rather than fixed ability helps children build resilience and long-term motivation. When kids believe effort matters, failure becomes information instead of identity. But, and this part is important, tone matters as much as words. Children are extremely sensitive to emotional authenticity. If support sounds fake, their brains notice. So I didn't rush. I kept my voice steady. And something subtle happened right in front of me. His shoulders dropped, just a little. Not completely. Not magically. But enough. And if you've ever helped someone who was anxious, you know, sometimes 5% less tension is the beginning of everything. He took a slow breath. I thought you'd be mad. That sentence landed gently, but deeply. Because hidden inside it was the story he had been telling himself all morning. For English learners, repeat slowly. I thought you'd be mad. Real English. Real emotion. I shook my head and gave a small smile. No. We're a team, remember? And right there, in that ordinary American kitchen, with the heater humming and the morning still gray outside, the energy between us shifted. Not dramatically. Not like a movie. But in real life, meaningful change rarely arrives with background music. Sometimes it begins with one relieved breath, and one parent choosing connection over correction. The science of failing forward. Failure has terrible marketing. No one wakes up excited to fail a test. No parent posts a smiling photo with the caption, "My son just failed. So proud." In American culture especially, success stories move fast. Winning is loud. Losing is quiet. But here is the irony, neuroscience is not nearly as dramatic as social media. The brain does not panic at failure the way we do. In fact, under the right conditions, it treats mistakes like valuable data. If you are practicing English with me, repeat this slowly. Failure is feedback. Good. Simple sentence. Powerful meaning. That morning in the kitchen, after I told my son we were a team, I realized something important. If I wanted to truly support him, I needed to understand what had actually happened inside his brain, not just on his test paper. So that night, after he went to bed, I started reading. Not dramatic research papers, just accessible studies about learning, memory, and academic stress. What I found changed the way I saw everything. There is something called the error detection system in the brain. When we make a mistake, a small electrical signal appears within milliseconds. Scientists can measure it. It's called the error-related negativity signal. Fancy name. Simple idea, your brain notices mistakes very quickly. But here's the important part. For learners who believe mistakes are dangerous, that signal is followed by anxiety. For learners who believe mistakes are useful, that signal is followed by adjustment. Same brain system. Different mindset. Different outcome. In plain English, the story you tell yourself after failure determines what your brain does next. The next evening, I invited my son to sit with me at the dining table. No lecture. No heavy tone. Just calm energy. I want to understand what happened, I said slowly. For listening practice, repeat. I want to understand. Notice how different that feels from, why did this happen? Curiosity opens doors. Accusation closes them. He explained that during the test, he understood most of the material while studying at home. But when the timer started, his heart beat faster. His hands felt cold. Then his mind went blank. Classic stress response. Under pressure, the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, activates. When that alarm gets loud, it reduces activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for reasoning and memory retrieval. Translation: stress can temporarily block access to knowledge you already have. It's like your brain locks the filing cabinet just when you need it most. I explained this to him in simple English. Your brain wasn't broken. It was stressed. He blinked. You mean I'm not bad at math? That question carried more weight than the grade itself. For English practice, repeat. My brain was stressed. When learners understand that stress affects performance, something powerful happens. Shame decreases. And when shame decreases, learning increases. Educational psychology research consistently shows that reducing shame improves academic resilience. But here's the catch, understanding the science is only step 1. Step 2 is changing behavior. So we created a small experiment. Instead of studying longer hours, we practiced failing safely. Yes. On purpose. We set a timer for 10 minutes. He solved practice problems while I sat nearby. When he made a mistake, I didn't correct immediately. Instead, I asked one question. What did your brain do there? At first, he laughed. But then he started noticing patterns. Oh. I rushed. Oh. I didn't read the full question. Oh. I panicked when I saw the big number. Self-awareness began replacing self-criticism. Research calls this metacognition, thinking about your thinking. Students who develop metacognitive awareness perform better long-term because they adjust strategies instead of attacking themselves. In simple English, smart learners study their habits, not just their textbooks. Weeks passed. Not dramatic transformation. Not instant A+ results. But something subtle shifted. When he made mistakes during practice, he didn't freeze anymore. He leaned forward instead of leaning back. His shoulders stayed relaxed longer. His breathing stayed steady. And here's something fascinating. Studies show that when students view mistakes as information, the brain actually shows stronger neural connections over time. The very act of calmly analyzing errors strengthens learning pathways. Failure, handled correctly, becomes fuel. One evening, after a long practice session, my son looked at me and said something that made me smile. "I think I was scared of the test, not the questions." Repeat slowly. Scared of the test, not the questions. That sentence is pure self-awareness. And in that moment, I realized something bigger than academics. My son had not failed because he lacked ability. He had failed because his fear had been louder than his preparation. And maybe, if I was honest, some of that fear had been shaped by me. But here's the hopeful part. Fear can be unlearned. Confidence can be rebuilt. Brains can adapt. And families can change the story they tell about failure. Because in the end, the most dangerous thing about failing is not the low score. It's the belief that the score defines you. And that belief? We were no longer feeding it. Real English at the dinner table. Most people think you improve English by buying a new book, downloading a new app, or watching one more grammar video at midnight. Those tools help, yes. But the biggest change in our family did not begin with a textbook. It began at the dinner table. If you are here for real English story practice, repeat slowly. Real English lives in real conversations. Good. Let that sentence settle. After we understood that stress, not intelligence, had played a major role in my son's failed test, we decided to change something simple but powerful. We stopped treating English like a school subject and started treating it like part of daily life. Because here is something language research confirms again and again: language grows best in meaningful context. The brain remembers words connected to emotion, interaction, and purpose much better than isolated vocabulary lists. In simple English, your brain likes stories more than flashcards. So instead of asking, "Did you finish your homework?" we began asking open-ended questions in slow, clear English. What was the hardest part of your day? What made you smile today? What confused you? At first, his answers were short. Nothing. Math. I don't know. That's normal. When someone feels insecure about language, they often protect themselves by speaking less. Linguists call this output anxiety. The less confident you feel, the less you talk. The less you talk, the slower you improve. It becomes a quiet cycle. We wanted to break that cycle, gently. So we introduced one small rule: no interrupting for correction during conversation. If he made a grammar mistake, we let it pass unless it blocked understanding. Why? Because research shows that constant correction increases anxiety and reduces spontaneous speech. Fluency grows in safety. Accuracy grows with time. That distinction changed everything. One night, while eating simple pasta, nothing fancy, just normal American weeknight food, I asked him about a science presentation he had to prepare. He hesitated. I feel nervous to speak in class. Repeat slowly. I feel nervous to speak. That sentence alone is worth practicing. It is real, honest English. Instead of immediately giving advice, I told him a story from my own early days in the United States. I described my first work meeting where everyone spoke so fast that I understood maybe 70%. I smiled and nodded at the wrong moment. I laughed half a second too late. When it was my turn to speak, my voice sounded different in my own ears, slower, heavier, unsure. I thought everyone could hear my accent, I said. He looked up. Could they? Yes, I smiled. But they also heard my ideas. That difference matters. In second language psychology, researchers talk about language identity integration. This means accepting that your accent, your rhythm, your pauses, they are not flaws. They are part of your communication style. Confidence is not sounding like someone else. Confidence is sounding like yourself, clearly. So we practice presentations at home. Not perfectly. Not formally. Just standing in the living room, speaking slowly while the rest of us listened. He stumbled. He repeated words. He searched for vocabulary. And we waited. Waiting is underrated. Silence gives the brain time to retrieve language. If you jump in too quickly to help, you accidentally train dependence. After a few weeks, something beautiful happened. His sentences became longer. Not because we forced them, but because he felt safe enough to try. Neuroscience backs this up. When learners feel psychologically safe, the brain releases dopamine and oxytocin, chemicals linked to motivation and social bonding. These chemicals strengthen neural connections involved in learning. In simple terms, kindness accelerates memory. One evening, he surprised me. Dad, he said, I think English is not the enemy. That sentence made me laugh. Repeat slowly. English is not the enemy. Because often, when learners struggle, they treat the language like an opponent. Something to defeat. Something judging them. But language is not judging you. It's waiting for you. We also started using storytelling as practice. Instead of memorizing dialogues, we told real stories from our week. Funny moments. Embarrassing mistakes. Small wins. Stories naturally include past tense, descriptive vocabulary, emotions, and sequencing words, all without forced grammar drills. For example, he once described dropping his lunch tray in the cafeteria. I was walking, and then suddenly, everything fell. I smiled gently. Everything fell, I repeated naturally inside my response. No lecture. Just modeling. That method is supported by communicative language teaching research. Learners absorb corrected forms more effectively when they hear them in meaningful context rather than isolated correction. Over time, I noticed something subtle but powerful. He stopped apologizing before speaking. Before, he used to begin sentences with, "Sorry, my English." Now he just spoke. And here's the part that surprised me the most. As he became more confident in English conversations at home, his academic confidence improved too. Because language is not just vocabulary. It's access. Access to understanding instructions. Access to asking questions. Access to clarifying confusion before it becomes failure. The dinner table had quietly become our training ground, not just for English, but for courage. And sitting there one night, listening to my son explain a school project with more ease than before, I realized something simple and powerful. We weren't just practicing a language. We were rebuilding belief. One conversation at a time. The night we spoke honestly. Some breakthroughs do not happen in classrooms. They do not happen during practice tests or carefully planned study sessions. Sometimes they happen late at night, when the house is quiet and honesty feels easier than pretending. One Friday evening, a few weeks after we began our new, slow English, safe conversation routine, my son knocked softly on my bedroom door. "Dad, can we talk?" If you are practicing with this real English story practice, repeat slowly. Can we talk? Simple. Direct. Powerful. I followed him to the living room. The lights were low. Outside, the American neighborhood was calm, no traffic, no noise, just that deep suburban quiet that makes conversations feel more serious. He sat on the couch but didn't look at me immediately. His hands were clasped together, fingers tight. "I didn't tell you everything about the test," he said. Now pause and repeat. "I didn't tell you everything." Confession English. Real life English. My heart stayed steady, but my attention sharpened. He continued, slowly. Some kids laughed when I asked the teacher to repeat the question. There it was. Not just academic pressure. Social pressure. Research in adolescent psychology shows that peer evaluation is one of the strongest emotional triggers during middle and high school years. The brain's social pain network activates in similar ways to physical pain. In simple language, embarrassment hurts. He swallowed before continuing. I knew the answer, but when they laughed, I just stopped thinking. If you've ever frozen in a meeting, gone blank during a presentation, or forgotten everything in an interview, you understand this experience. Repeat slowly. I just stopped thinking. That sentence describes a neurological shutdown. Under social threat, the brain shifts resources from reasoning to self-protection. It's not weakness. It's wiring. I leaned back slightly and kept my voice calm. That must have felt hard. Notice the difference. Not, why didn't you ignore them? Not, you shouldn't care. Just acknowledgement. Validation is powerful. Studies in emotional regulation show that when feelings are named and validated, the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, reduces its activity. In plain English, when someone feels understood, their stress decreases. He nodded, eyes still on his hands. I don't want to look stupid. Repeat slowly. I don't want to look stupid. That fear is universal. Not just for kids. Adults carry it into offices, meetings, even language classes. I told him something I had not fully admitted before. When I first moved to the United States, I avoided asking questions in meetings. He looked up. Why? Because I was afraid my English sounded slow. It felt strange saying that out loud. Parents often hide their insecurities, thinking it protects their children. But vulnerability can be a bridge. Psychologists call this modeling emotional transparency. When parents share appropriate struggles, children feel less alone in theirs. I continued. But do you know what I realized? He shook his head. Most people were too busy worrying about themselves to judge me. He smiled a little at that. Because it's true. Social psychology research consistently shows that people overestimate how much others notice their mistakes. It's called the spotlight effect. We think we're on stage. In reality, everyone else is busy reading their own script. I explained it simply. Your brain thinks everyone is watching. But most people are thinking about their own problems. He leaned back, processing. So, they're probably scared too? Yes, I said. Just differently. Silence followed. But this time it wasn't heavy. It was reflective. Then he asked something that surprised me. Do you ever feel like you failed me? The question hit softly, but deeply. Repeat slowly. Do you ever feel like you failed me? This is not textbook English. This is heart-level English. I didn't answer quickly. Because honesty deserved space. Yes, I admitted. When you failed that test, part of me thought I failed too. His eyes widened slightly. You did? Yes. But I was wrong. He looked confused. I explained. Your test result is information. It is not a verdict on you. And it is not a verdict on me. This distinction matters. In cognitive behavioral psychology, separating events from identity reduces shame and increases problem-solving ability. Event, failed test. Identity, not smart. Those are not the same thing. We talked for nearly an hour. Not about grades. Not about performance strategies. Just about fear. About belonging. About how hard it is sometimes to speak up in a fast classroom when English still feels like a second skin. Before going to bed, he said something quietly. I think I was more scared of being laughed at than failing. That sentence changed everything. Because now we weren't fighting an academic problem. We were addressing a social fear. And social fears can be trained, slowly, safely, strategically. As he stood up to go to his room, he paused. Thanks for not being mad. I smiled. Thanks for being honest. That night, lying in the dark, I realized something important. Support does not mean removing obstacles. It means standing beside someone while they face them. And in that quiet American living room, under soft light and honest words, my son had taken a step forward, not in grades yet, but in courage. And courage, unlike test scores, compounds over time. Blame or stand beside. There is a moment every parent faces, quiet, ordinary, but emotionally expensive. It's the fork in the road between blame and support. Most families don't notice when they arrive there. They just feel tension in the air and react the way they were taught years ago. That week after my son and I had our honest late-night talk, I found myself standing right at that invisible fork. If you are practicing English with me, repeat slowly. Blame pushes away. Support pulls closer. Good. That sentence may sound simple, but psychology research has been confirming its truth for decades. At school, the pressure on my son had not magically disappeared. American classrooms move fast. Participation matters. Confidence often looks louder than it actually is. I could see he was trying, really trying, but hesitation still visited him at inconvenient moments. One afternoon, he came home and dropped his backpack a little harder than usual. Not dramatic. Just enough to tell an observant parent something had happened. I didn't jump in right away. That pause matters. Behavioral research shows that when children enter a room visibly stressed, the first 30 seconds of parental reaction can significantly shape how much they choose to share. Immediate interrogation often triggers shutdown. Calm presence invites conversation. So I stayed neutral. After a minute, he sighed. Today was uncomfortable. Repeat slowly. Today was uncomfortable. Useful real-life English. I nodded slightly. What made it uncomfortable? Notice the wording. Not, what did you do wrong? Not, what happened this time? Just open curiosity. He sat down across from me. The teacher asked me to explain my answer in front of the class. I waited. And? I knew the answer, but my voice felt stuck. Performance freeze again. This is extremely common in second language learners. Under public speaking pressure, the brain's cognitive load increases sharply. Working memory gets crowded. Word retrieval slows down. It feels like your thoughts are moving through heavy traffic. In plain English, the brain gets busy and the mouth gets shy. He continued. Some kids were whispering. There it was, the social layer again. Now inside my head, two parenting voices quietly woke up. Voice number 1, the old school pressure voice, said. He needs to toughen up. Voice number 2, the newer, calmer voice we had been building, said. He needs support while he practices courage. This is the real fork in the road. Research in family dynamics shows that repeated blame responses increase avoidance behavior in children. Supportive coaching, on the other hand, increases what psychologists call approach behavior, the willingness to try again even after discomfort. In simpler terms, blame makes kids hide. Support makes them try again. I leaned forward slightly. Did you answer? He nodded. Yes, but very quietly. Progress. Not perfect. But progress. If you are following the real English learning rhythm, repeat. Not perfect, but progress. That phrase is powerful in both language learning and life. I could see he was watching my face carefully, scanning for disappointment signals. Children are remarkably skilled emotional radar systems. Studies show they often detect subtle parental microexpressions faster than adults expect. So I kept my tone steady. I'm proud you answered. His shoulders dropped just a little. Not dramatically. But enough. This is something many parents misunderstand. Confidence rarely grows from big motivational speeches. More often, it grows from small moments of safe reinforcement repeated consistently over time. Micro-wins build macro-confidence. I asked gently. What felt hardest, the question or the people watching? He didn't hesitate. The people. Clear insight. And once the real obstacle is identified, strategy becomes possible. We talked about something called exposure practice. Psychologists often use gradual exposure to help reduce performance anxiety. Instead of jumping straight into high-pressure situations, you build tolerance step by step. In normal human language, you train courage in small doses. So we made a simple plan. At home, he would practice explaining answers out loud, first to me, then to both parents, then occasionally while standing up instead of sitting. Small increases. Controlled environment. Low social threat. Research supports this approach. Gradual exposure reduces amygdala overreaction and builds what scientists call stress inoculation. The brain learns that discomfort is survivable. Before heading to his room, my son paused and asked something quietly. "You're really not disappointed?" Repeat slowly. "You're really not disappointed?" Trust still under construction. I shook my head. "No. I'm watching you grow." He gave a small nod, the kind kids give when they are starting to believe you but not fully ready to admit it yet. And as he walked down the hallway, I realized something with surprising clarity. Parents often think their job is to remove failure from their child's path. But that's not the real job. The real job is to stand close enough that failure doesn't turn into fear. Because blame creates distance. Support builds bridges. And in our small American home, one careful response at a time, we were quietly choosing which road our family would walk. Small changes, big shift. If you look at transformation on social media, it always seems dramatic. Big speeches. Huge breakthroughs. Before and after photos with bright lighting and confident smiles. But real change, especially in learning English, parenting, or rebuilding confidence after failure, rarely looks like that. It looks small. Almost boring. And that is exactly why most people underestimate it. If you are practicing English with me, repeat slowly. Small changes create big shifts. Good. Keep that rhythm in your mind. After my son and I chose support over blame, and after we understood that stress, not intelligence, had frozen his brain during the test, we stopped searching for big solutions. Instead, we made tiny adjustments in daily life. Not dramatic. Just consistent. The first change was about routine. Every evening, instead of studying for long, exhausting hours, we used the 25-minute focus rule. Research in cognitive science shows that the brain maintains high-quality focus for limited periods before performance drops. The Pomodoro technique, short focus intervals followed by short breaks, is not trendy for no reason. It aligns with how attention actually works. So we set a timer for 25 minutes. Full focus. No phone. No multitasking. Then a 5-minute break. Stretch. Drink water. Small talk. Repeat slowly for English practice. Focus, then pause. Simple structure. Powerful effect. Within a few weeks, I noticed something subtle. He no longer looked overwhelmed before studying. Instead of facing a mountain, he was facing a small hill, repeatedly. And small hills are climbable. The second change was about language. Before, when he struggled with homework, he used sentences like, "I'm bad at this," or "I can't do this." Those sentences may sound harmless, but cognitive behavioral research shows that repeated negative self-talk strengthens neural pathways linked to avoidance and low confidence. So we replaced those phrases, not with fake positivity, but with realistic alternatives. Instead of, "I can't do this," we practiced, "I don't understand this yet." Repeat slowly. I don't understand this yet. That single word, yet, changes the entire emotional direction of a sentence. It shifts identity from fixed to developing. Studies on growth mindset confirm that adding, yet, reduces performance anxiety and increases persistence. The third change was physical. Yes, physical. We began taking short walks after dinner. Nothing athletic. Just 15 minutes around the neighborhood. Research in neuroscience shows that light physical movement improves memory consolidation and reduces stress hormones. In simple English, walking helps your brain think. During those walks, we talked in slow English about normal life. Weather. School. Funny things we saw. Sometimes about failure. Sometimes not. Language practice without pressure. Learning without spotlight. And something beautiful began to happen. His voice changed. Not the accent. The tone. Before, when discussing school, there was tension under his words. A carefulness. A fear of saying the wrong thing. Now, there was more flow. More willingness. More ownership. One evening, while solving practice math problems at the kitchen table, the same table where that failed test had once felt like a verdict, he stopped and looked at me. I think I panic less now. Repeat slowly. I panic less now. That sentence is progress. It's not perfection. It's improvement. And research supports what we were seeing. When learners repeatedly face manageable challenges in safe environments, the brain's stress response gradually weakens. This process is sometimes called desensitization. In everyday words, the scary thing becomes less scary. But here is the part many people miss. These changes did not remove difficulty. Tests were still hard. Class presentations still made his heart beat faster. But his relationship with discomfort changed. Instead of freezing completely, he pushed through 5 extra seconds. Then 10. Then a full explanation. Small growth compounds. In American culture, we often celebrate big achievements, the high grades, the awards, the visible success. But educational psychology reminds us that long-term resilience is built quietly in daily habits. Microactions. Repeated consistently. And here is something even more important. As my son changed, I changed too. I stopped checking his grades with silent anxiety. I stopped scanning his face for signs of failure. Instead, I began asking different questions. What did you learn from that? What felt easier this time? What will you try differently? Coaching instead of controlling. Guiding instead of gripping. Because sometimes, when parents say, "My son failed," what they really mean is, "I'm afraid I failed as a guide." But guidance is not about preventing every fall. It's about teaching someone how to stand back up. One Saturday morning, months after that original failed test, I watched him sit at the same kitchen table preparing for another exam. No dramatic music. No motivational speech. Just steady breathing and organized notes. He looked up and smiled slightly. "I'm nervous," he admitted. I nodded. "That's normal." Repeat slowly. Nervous is normal. And in that moment, I understood something deeply. Confidence is not the absence of fear. It is the ability to move while fear is present. And that ability? It grows from small changes, repeated daily, inside homes where support speaks louder than blame. The result we didn't expect. If life followed movie scripts, this is where I would tell you my son walked into his next test, smiled confidently, and came home waving a perfect score in the air while inspirational music played in the background. Real life, of course, is less dramatic, and far more interesting. If you are practicing English with me, repeat slowly. Real progress is usually quiet. Good. Keep that truth close. The morning of his next big exam arrived on an ordinary Tuesday. No special weather. No lucky breakfast. Just the usual American school morning, backpacks, car doors, and the low hum of neighborhood routines starting their day. But inside our house, the emotional atmosphere was different from before. Not because fear had disappeared. Because fear was finally being managed. Before leaving, my son stood near the door, adjusting his backpack strap, a small nervous habit he didn't realize he had. "I feel nervous," he admitted. "You already know what to do. Repeat slowly." "I feel nervous." I nodded calmly. "That means your brain is getting ready." This wasn't empty comfort. Performance psychology shows that reframing anxiety as preparation can significantly improve outcomes. The body's stress response, faster heartbeat, sharper focus, can support performance when interpreted correctly. In simple English, nerves can help you if you don't fight them. He took a slow breath, something we had practiced many times, and gave a small nod before heading out the door. And then, we waited. Parents know this part well. Waiting during your child's important moments has a special kind of quiet tension. You go through your normal day, but part of your brain is standing in the hallway outside their classroom. Hours later, the front door opened. Backpack dropped. Shoes kicked off. But this time, I didn't rush to read his face. That was one of the small changes I had learned. Give space first. Let the child lead the emotional reveal. He walked into the kitchen and poured himself some water. Then he said something that surprised me. "I don't know if I did great." Pause. "But I didn't freeze." Repeat slowly. "I didn't freeze." That sentence mattered more than any grade. Because remember, our real battle had never been about intelligence. It had been about fear. I leaned against the counter, keeping my voice steady. "What felt different?" He thought for a moment. My heart was still fast, but my brain stayed on. That is the language of progress. Neuroscience would describe this as improved stress regulation. The amygdala still activated, that's normal, but the prefrontal cortex remained engaged. In human terms, the alarm system turned on, but it didn't shut down the thinking system. Weeks earlier, that balance had not existed. Now it did. And that's when I realized the result we were waiting for wasn't printed on the test paper. It was already standing in my kitchen. Over the next few days, something else changed too. He began raising his hand more often in class. Not every time. Not perfectly. But consistently. Teachers notice patterns like that. Educational research shows that increased classroom participation often appears before grade improvement. Confidence tends to lead performance, not the other way around. One evening, while we were walking our usual after-dinner loop around the neighborhood, he said something casually that almost made me stop in the middle of the sidewalk. "I think I'm not scared of mistakes like before." Repeat slowly. "I'm not scared of mistakes like before." That sentence is gold. Because fear of mistakes is one of the biggest barriers in language learning, academic performance, and even adult professional growth. Studies consistently show that learners who tolerate mistakes improve faster over time. Why? Because they stay in the game longer. Back home later that week, the official test results finally arrived. Now, if you are expecting a perfect score moment, let me gently adjust expectations. It was not perfect. but it was clearly better. Solid improvement. Visible progress. And more importantly, no emotional collapse attached to it. He looked at the paper, nodded once, and said calmly, "I know what to fix next time." Repeat slowly. "I know what to fix." That sentence is the voice of ownership. Not shame. Not avoidance. Ownership. And that, according to decades of learning research, is one of the strongest predictors of long-term success. I looked at him sitting there, more relaxed than months before, more willing, more steady, and something inside me finally exhaled fully. Not because the grade was higher, but because the fear was lower. Because here is the truth many parents slowly discover. Your child's success is not built in the moment they stop failing. It is built in the moment they stop being afraid to try again. And watching my son that evening, calmly planning his next improvement instead of quietly protecting his pride, I knew something important had shifted in our family. The test had measured his answers. But the real result? It had measured our growth. A different definition of success. If you ask most people what success looks like in America, they will give you a familiar list. High grades. Top schools. Confident speeches. Fast answers. No visible weakness. It's a shiny image, easy to admire and even easier to chase. But sitting at my kitchen table months after my son's failed test, the same table where fear once felt heavier than hope, I realized something simple and life-changing. Success is not the absence of failure. Success is the courage to stay engaged after it. If you are practicing English with me, repeat slowly. Success is staying engaged. Good. That sentence carries our whole journey. When my son first failed, I asked myself a painful question: did I fail too? It haunted me in quiet moments. It followed me into work. It whispered when I watched other parents talk proudly about achievements. But here is what I understand now. Parents do not fail when their children stumble. They fail only when they choose blame over guidance. In the United States, especially in competitive school systems, it is easy to confuse performance with identity. Grades become labels. Labels become stories. And stories quietly shape confidence. But our family learned something different. A grade is feedback. A mistake is information. A difficult moment is not a life sentence. Over time, my son's scores continued improving, slowly, steadily. Some tests were strong. Some were average. A few were still disappointing. That's real life. But the emotional pattern had changed. He no longer apologized before showing me results. He no longer asked, "Are you mad?" Instead, he asked better questions. What can I adjust? Can we practice this part again? That shift, from fear to curiosity, is the real happy ending. Not dramatic. Not viral. But deeply real. If you are learning English right now, maybe you see yourself somewhere in this story. Maybe you have failed a test. Maybe you feel embarrassed speaking in public. Maybe you are afraid people will laugh at your accent or judge your grammar. Listen carefully. The brain does not measure your worth by your mistakes. It measures patterns. And patterns can change. Research in neuroplasticity shows that the brain continues rewiring itself throughout life. With repeated effort in safe environments, new neural connections strengthen. Old fear pathways weaken. In simple English, you are not stuck. One evening, not long ago, my son stood in the living room practicing a class presentation. His posture was not perfect. His voice was not dramatic. But it was steady. After finishing, he looked at me and said with a small smile, "I'm not afraid like before." Repeat slowly. I'm not afraid like before. That sentence means more than any perfect score ever could. Because fear once controlled him. Now, it no longer decides his actions. And as for me, I stopped asking whether I failed as a father. Instead, I started asking whether I was present. Present when he needed reassurance. Present when he needed correction. Present when he needed silence. Parenting in America, parenting anywhere, is not about producing flawless children. It is about raising resilient ones. Resilience is not loud. It does not shout. It grows quietly in kitchens, on evening walks, during honest conversations under soft lights. Looking back at that first failed test, I almost want to thank it. Not because it hurt, but because it revealed. It revealed our pressure. It revealed our fears. It revealed how easily love can sound like expectation. And it gave us the chance to choose differently. So let me ask you something, and answer honestly. When someone you love fails, do you blame, or do you stand beside them? When you fail in your English learning, do you criticize yourself, or do you get curious? Because the difference between blame and support is the difference between shrinking and growing. My son did not become perfect. He became braver. And I did not become a perfect father. I became more aware. In the end, that is our happy ending. Not a flawless report card. But a family that learned how to face failure without losing trust. If you remember one sentence from this entire real English story practice, let it be this. Failure is not the opposite of success. It is part of the path. And sometimes, the moment you think you failed, is the moment you begin to grow. Sometimes the moment that feels like the end, is actually the quiet beginning of your strongest chapter. If this real English story practice helped you feel calmer, more confident, or simply less alone on your English learning journey, don't stop here. This channel is where we turn real-life struggles into slow, clear English you can actually understand, and use. Subscribe now and join thousands of learners building confidence step by step. Like the video if this story spoke to you. Comment below, do you blame, or do you support? Because the next story might sound a lot like yours, and you won't want to miss what happens next.